It might not be communication, it might be startled, it might be scared, it might be defensive, but to me it screamed something that was just a bit more than that. And I think when we're dealing with such amazing creatures as cephalopods, I do kind of like lean towards giving them perhaps more sentience and more intelligence than they might have. But yeah, that behavior to me just it was really really striking.
What's up, everybody? From Nautilus, I'm Brian Gallagher, and you're watching Behind the Scenes. Today I'm speaking with Alex Riley. Alex is an award winning science writer living in Bristol in the UK. His work has been published by Aeon Magazine, the BBC, The Guardian, PBS's Nova Next, and New Scientist, among others. He's the author of the recent book, A Cure for Darkness: The Story of Depression and How We Treat It. His new story in Nautilus was The Mystery of the Largest Light in the Sea. This giant squid has the world's biggest light producing organs. But why? Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
No, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, to start off, could you summarize your intellectual and academic background a bit and tell us how you came to start writing about science?
Sure. So I just have always been fascinated with animals from a very, very young age. Writing about dinosaurs, learning about all the different sort of megafauna around the world, creating scrapbooks, and then that just developed into a zoology degree, master's, a PhD in developmental biology, which I left after about 2 months because I got scared away by 4 years of impending doom. But then I became a science writer because I wanted to stay within the sort of science field, and just started writing a blog, and then started pitching to magazines, and that's how all this started. So my background is in zoology. I wrote my book on depression because it sort of links to my family history with quite severe mental illness. But that was sort of something I had to write. I think it was a personal story, whereas my true fascination and my true sort of interest is with the animal kingdom and maybe even the plant kingdom and all the fungi and everything like that. I won't exclude them either. But yeah, just been fascinated by the wonders of the natural world.
What was the seed for that interest? Was there something peculiar about where you grew up where there was just a lot of nature and animals and plants on display that stoked your curiosity?
I grew up in rural England, but I think it's because no one did it. Like my dad was in construction, my brother's in construction, my mum was a hairdresser. So I was like, well, this is kind of like an escapism for me. This is my thing. No one else has this.
Mm.
So I think it just grew from, it just felt very natural for me. And then for no one else to be doing it, it just kind of, it felt like the thing that I, myself, it's selfishly, I just loved having this escape.
Mm. Nice. All right. Once again, your new story in Nautilus is The Mystery of the Largest Light in the Sea. Could you give us a brief summary of your story for our viewers who may not have read it yet?
Sure, it's about this deep sea squid. It's a giant squid, but it's not the giant squid. So it's this amazing species called Teningia danae. It's an octopus squid because they have 8 arms, but they don't have the tentacles that squid usually have. So 8 arms is kind of common to all cephalopods except the nautilus, which is the shelled cephalopod that's kind of quite an ancient ammonite-like creature. The octopus squid is so named because, it doesn't have the two tentacles that define a squid. So it looks kind of like an octopus, but it's got all of the squid sort of like ferocity, the sort of sharp, pointy head. It has these amazing wings almost that it sort of floats through the darkness of the deep sea. It is very rarely seen, as much of life is down at those depths. But when it is seen, it sort of has these quite unusual behaviors that people have tried to understand. What does it have these giant light organs that are just so uh, I write in the piece that they're just in a league of their own. Like light organs, also known as photophores, are very, very common in the deep sea and especially with squid. But they're usually about a millimeter or so in diameter. These ones are about the size of lemons, and so they are giant. And no one really knows why that they have these at the end of two of their arms. And each one is kind of encapsulated in sort of like an eyelid, so it opens and closes like eyes. And I wonder if that's some sort of the fascination, because we humans love to think about things that are human-like, and perhaps because it's got two and it's got eyelids, maybe we see sort of a reflection of ourselves. But yeah, in the piece, I just sort of dug into all of the sort of research and spoke to the few people in the world who study this quite rare and lesser known giant squid. They're about 8 foot long at the maximum, so they're about half the size of the true giant squid. But they're bigger than you or I. They're pretty big.
What inspired you or gave you an impetus to write about this squid now?
So there've been videos recently. In 2020, there was a really beautiful video of one coming into sort of very close contact with a submersible from the Schmidt Ocean Institute. They were just diving down, and I think it was about 700 meters. So it's kind of not pitch blackness. It's not the midnight zone. It's like the mid-water zone of the sea, but there's very little light. And this squid it just comes into the ROV, the remote submersible, into its headlights and just sort of floats there for a while. And it just seems like, like we have these moments with creatures that seem to look back, and there's something behind their behavior or their eyes, like elephants and octopuses and these sort of sentient beings that we share this planet with. And this video, I've watched it so many times. I'm just trying to think, what is it doing there? What is, and it's kind of opening and closing its eyelids on its photophores, on its light organs. And it just seems curious. It's just, what is this new thing in my environment? So I think that's what really gripped me. And then from that video 2 years ago, which was it wasn't viral, but it was quite popular on Twitter, I just then dug into people who studied the babies of these squid, who've studied essentially a lot of people have studied the stomach contents of sperm whales, because that's where we get a lot of our squid info from, because they just hunt hundreds and hundreds of these things every day. So yeah, these videos are just the fascination of what is it like to be this squid, and why is it coming so close to something it could easily avoid? We know that the giant squid avoids pretty much every thing that goes down. They've only had a few images and videos of it. So why is this squid so happy to be photographed? I think that's what kind of ignited my interest in this species and wanting to write about it.
Was there any sort of discernible pattern to how the squid was showing its light orbs? At the beginning of the piece, you write as if to suggest that it was maybe communicating in some Morse-like code with how often it was showing the lights.
Yeah, so there've been like I said, there've been very few interactions with this. I think we've got a few videos, maybe 4 videos, one of which is from a camera attached to an elephant seal that's hunting a Taninja. So this squid is sort of like flashing its photophores, but not in the same way as like this calm, very slow opening, closing. So it has a few behaviors that we've seen. One was from a very small squid that was caught and kept in an aquarium on a research vessel. I think it was in the 1970s, and this tiny little thing that was just like the size of your pinky finger, I think, had some quite repetitive behaviors where it would flash its photophores before attacking the scientist's finger and nibbling it with its beak, because they have these amazing parrot-like beaks. So,
Yeah.
and in the paper they don't mention whether it hurt. It was just sort of like, just a passing comment that they got attacked by this tiny little Taninja dane. But yes, this longer sort of lasting opening and closing that was shown in this 2020 video, it seemed quite unlike that. It wasn't trying to stun anything. It wasn't trying to hunt. It was just for a few seconds, and then it sort of drifted away, as if like it just seemed. It opens it up its really large, beautiful wings on its mantle, on its head, and just drifts back into the darkness. And it was just. I mean, it's completely, it could be completely different to what I'm even suggesting in the piece. It might not be communication. It might be startled. It might be scared. It might be defensive. But to me, it screams something that was just a bit more than that. And I think when we're dealing with such amazing creatures as cephalopods, I do kind of like lean towards giving them perhaps more sentience and more intelligence than they might have. But yeah, that behavior to me it was really, really striking.
What were some of your first thoughts about how to go about writing this story?
Basically, every story I write is just, who do I talk to? Who knows about this thing? And I just, go into these stories and just try and learn as much as I can and see what unfolds. Because it started off with a very, sort of short brief of light organs. What are they doing with these massive ones? And then it just came into this huge like natural history of how do we study the deep sea? Like, we're studying these animals through whale hunting that started became industrialized in the 1940s, and we're catching all these sperm whales, and that's how we know so much about these animals, is from these stomach contents. So there's this sort of like dark history of studying the deep sea. So yeah, I started with none of that really at the forefront of my mind. It was kind of, this is just a cool species, but then it grew into something that was much bigger, and sort of had a reflection on ourselves. Why do we find this thing interesting? And also, how do we understand even the small amount we do know about this species? How do we find that? Because it's not innocent like research. It's got a bit of a dark history to it. I think that always should be written alongside the awe and wonder of the natural kingdom.
Do you know if there's any evidence that bioluminescent creatures use light to communicate, instead of just using it, to lighten up the dark surroundings?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to. I think there's one study or one species comes to mind, which is the Humboldt squid. So these are similar size to the Taninja. They're pretty big. They're really they can swim in vast herds, or I don't know, shoals, sorry, of squid that with 1,000 individuals or so. And the study that was pretty conclusive found that that they do communicate with the sort of changes in their color. Less so bioluminescence, but there's definitely it's very hard to even sort of make any firm conclusions about these animals because they're so distant, and we have such small windows into their worlds that bioluminescent is usually seen as like a predator avoidance strategy, like either as a trying to trick them into thinking they were here and now they're over there, like a sort of bioluminescent ink. But yeah, I think all that will develop over time. Now we have more technologies that are able to record these animals in their natural state, because as soon as you send a robot down there or a submersible with a bright light, you're already affecting that environment. You're already making it unnatural. And that's why you see so much bioluminescence down there. It's because animals are kind of freaking out because they've got this huge robot in there, like flowing past them. So I think a lot of research now is done with redshifted light that isn't as damaging, and also really highly sensitive cameras that can pick up the finer sort of traces of bioluminescent that these animals are sort of evolved to see and to produce. Because it's a very dim world. It's not a starlit sky. It's not like a universe down there. It's actually quite just black darkness, and it's very rare to see bioluminescence because it's a very costly thing to do, to produce light. It tells your neighbors where you are, which could be a predator, and also there's not much food down in these depths. So to produce light is something you've got to be very careful, and you can't just produce light for the hell of it. You've got to really think about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the ideas scientists have for why this squid would have evolved such massive, or extraordinarily big comparatively to other creatures? Photophores.
They don't know. That's the kind of thing that no one really knows. People who've studied this for decades. There are theories, and I even have my own, which I kind of like bounced off some of the scientists that I spoke to. My favorite is this squid is hunted by the biggest predator on Earth, the sperm whale. So if you want to kind of try and escape a sperm whale, either you have to be very fast, which they're not compared to a sperm whale, or you have to hide. And it's very hard to hide in a 3D world where you don't have a bottom or a side or a top. You're just floating in this mid-water. So one of the theories is that these can be used to stun or sort of like momentarily bleach the retina of a sperm whale. It's completely unproven and untested, but this is one of the things that it might be for, that it's got these photophores as a sort of like a stunning mechanism to try and escape the jaws of these sperm whales. The fact that we find so many Taninja and other squid in sperm whale stomach shows it's not the most efficient or effective method, if that is what it's for. But it seems pretty clear that there was a Japanese study from 2005 where they tried to find pictures of the 2005. They tried to find pictures of the giant squid, and they found just loads and loads of Taninja, and these guys were just sort of finding the mackerel bait that they sent down to these depths and just flashing it before they would then wrap their tentacles around it, which are lined with these 2 rows of like hooked barbs that are within it's almost like a cat's claw. They're retractable, so they go inside of this sort of like tissue layer, and they come out when they want to sort of grip onto something. So they did that a lot. They use them to sort of either stun their prey and then sort of like, or disorientate their prey, and then they can kind of, but they did this with a dead piece of mackerel. So, whether that's a natural behavior or not, what we're studying essentially is what these squid do, put dead mackerel in the water. But I think stunning for prey acquisition is probably the best evidence we have right now.
Is there any precedent in other creatures of trying to temporarily stun or bleach the vision of a predator using like a flash of light?
I'm sure there is, and none comes straight to mind, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't. I mean, a lot of animals try and stun their prey, whether by other means, whether it's venom or whether it's in a place that's so dark that your eyes must be so sensitive to light. Even if you have a moment of this sort of glowing photophore, maybe that is enough down there to really disorientate them. So it could be sort of like a deep sea version of that, really, like a venomous light, if you will.
Right. Yeah, if you've ever watched Dragon Ball Z, I don't know that there's a character in this anime show that has this technique called the solar flare, which is exactly what he does. Just temporarily blinds his foe so that he has time to escape or do something else.
Oh, that sounds exactly what they're doing. Yeah, maybe it's based
Exactly.
on Taninja.
Yeah. What are you working on at the moment? I think I read that you have another book coming out in a few years.
Yeah, so
Planned.
yeah, early stages, but yeah, I've got a book in on life in extreme environments, which is where this sort of interest came from. Is how life sort of is found everywhere, and all the sort of weird adaptations that allow it to thrive in the harshest environments, from wind-blown mountaintops to the deepest trenches, and life without oxygen, and all these sort of amazing tests that life always succeeds at. And so deep sea squid will be a feature of how do animals sort of behave and have these amazing life cycles in complete darkness. And actually, I guess the main stressor down there is food, because there's very little food. They're basically being fed by marine snow, which is sort of like all the dead animals from above and their poo kind of like floating down. So that's kind of all they have to live on. So that'll be part of the chapter on like food scarcity. How does life thrive without food? So yeah, that'll be out in a couple of years, I hope, after I've done a lot of research and travel. So yeah, that's basically taken up most of my time.
Right on. All right. To close out, do you want to tell our viewers where they can find you online? Do you have social media channels they could follow, or a website they
Yeah,
can visit to find out more about your work?
I mean, I used to be on Twitter until it kind of like self-exploded, and I'm still on there, but it's like I'm kind of like sending out new feelers into like Instagram. My handle is Alex LaRiley, so L-A Riley. It's actually a terrible handle, but my middle name is Lawrence, so it's kind of like the first two letters from my middle name. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. I'm not that frequent on it anymore, but Instagram's probably the best place to find me, and you'll find videos and images of my dog, who's like an amazing beast. So yeah, as well as my articles. So that's probably the best place.
Nice, nice. All right, Alex. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat, and
No,
I
it's
really
been
enjoyed
great.
your piece. It was fun to read.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on.